So can I just begin by saying the most important thing, and then if you want to think about something else while I'm on my feet, you can. I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you this morning. This is incredibly important to the university, and it's incredibly important to the sort of place the university is. And what I want to do is to spend about, should be about 5, it might, by the time I've rubbish it on, be about 10 minutes, setting out in very broad brush terms why that is, and what some of the big challenges for us as an institution, the sort of institution we are, in becoming, and I'm going to use my language quite carefully here, more sustainable than we would otherwise be. And at the root of this is something that I think runs through all of the things that we think about sustainability, which is sometimes the gap, sometimes the tensions between the choices we want to make in our own personal lives and the things that we have to do as part of our jobs in order to make the institution work. And there's sometimes a gap there. And one of the things we have to try to do is to try to find ways, and you never quite close that gap, closing the gap as much as we can. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. So I'm going to use one example, which some of you, I'm afraid, have got a very limited range of examples. So an example I've used before. So where I start is with a slide, and the technology lets me down. Katie, do you think you can press the button? Thank you. Okay, so I'll start with this. Why this? This is has to be it's a medieval picture of the University of Bologna. Bologna was the first university established in Europe, established in the year 1088. So it's something over 900 years old. And why is it there? Because it turns out that the only, with the single exception of the Roman Catholic Church, the only institutions that existed in the Middle Ages that have a continuous and unbroken existence through to the present are universities. Bologna was the first, Padua came a bit later, Paris a little later, Oxford, Cambridge, and so on, and so on. And it's worth remembering that because universities turn out to be extraordinarily long-lived institutions. And that means that one of the things that we all have to think about is what is our contribution to this place in the long term. And there's all sorts of stuff, isn't there? There's always noise in the course of the day. There's things that happen that crop up unexpectedly. There are the events that take you by surprise, and then there's the annual operating plans and the annual budgets and so on and so on. And that's what we have to do. But at root, we need to think about the long term. And the reason for starting with that is that universities, as I say, are long-term focused institutions. And then I'm going to come back to some of the personal and professional. So I got my phone out, and I got my phone out because one of my daughters lives in New York. I had a sort of parental wobble about this because she gave up her job and went to New York for love. But anyway, we'll leave that. And she lives in New York, and every weekend she talks to us through this on FaceTime, and it's like magic. Yeah, the phone rings and there's her face, and she sees my face. Isn't that great? It's absolutely fantastic. And 25 years ago, somebody had said, you'll be able to carry your phone, won't be plugged into a wall, you'll be able to carry it around with you, and you'll be able to have face-to-face conversations with anybody in the world, and it costs virtually nothing. And it's great, and we'll use it. And we've taken for granted, and this is an example, we've taken for granted technologies. I can't quite take technologies for granted, can I? But by and large, we've taken technologies for granted that connect us, that mean that we do all sorts of things through things like this. We can talk to other people, we can manage our finances, we can book our train tickets, we can etc., etc., etc. And isn't that great? And not just that, but that technology, and I've used this slide several times, turns out now to be virtually universal. In some of the remotest parts of the world, in villages in Africa, in villages in the Himalaya, in street markets in Bangladesh, there is incredible Wi-Fi connectivity. And this is hugely liberating for everybody, and this is fantastic, and we all use it. But sitting behind all of that is this, which is the environmental devastation in the northern Congo, where there are cobalt mines that are necessary for producing the tiny fractions of cobalt that are sitting in this, are being strip mined, devastating impact on the landscape, as you can see, devastating impact on the habitats, particularly for gorillas, but also devastating impacts on lifestyles and communities. And I've used that as an example. I didn't need to use technology. I could have talked about the cotton shirt that I'm wearing. I like this shirt. Thought a bit about doing a presentation today. Which shirt shall I wear? I like it. But I could have talked about the challenges of producing cottons that we rely on. Or I could have talked about motor cars. Or I could have talked about buildings, etc., etc. And running through all of them is this enormous big contradiction that the ways, many of the things we take for granted, on which we depend, also turn out to have enormous challenges for society and the world we live. And we back into some of this tension between the personal choices we make and the roles that we pick up. So I don't think, I'd say that, because I don't think any of this is easy. You know, it's very easy to say that sustainability is a sort of polyfiller word, that we're all in favour of it. Put your hands up if you're against sustainability. And nobody is ever going to say that. But actually, once you start scratching into it, there are enormous challenges for us as individuals and as institutions. And there's been a really interesting, this is a sort of parallel, sort of veer off at some point. We're all responsible, aren't we, for the choices we make in our daily lives. There is, and this veers off in one direction, there is a grotesque public health crisis across this country, across the rich world, of rising levels of obesity, which mean that there are large numbers of people who will live less longer than their parents because of the choices they have made about diet and exercise. But actually, it's also pointed out, they're making those choices in an environment where it's sometimes extremely difficult to make healthy choices. It's really difficult to exercise enough given some of the demands of work. It's really difficult to make the healthy diet choices and so on. And I've come across the phrase the obesogenic environment in which people are. And I think there's similar issues around sustainability, that we want to make positive choices in landscapes in which it's extremely difficult. So I think it's really important, but I also think there are enormous practical challenges. And that means that we never quite get to a destination. We have to keep working at it. So for me, there are four things why this matters to the university. The first, we are here for the long term, absolutely here for the long term. After I have gone, after you have all gone, in 2016, 2017, 2018, this university will be here. And some of the things it does in 2060, 2080 and beyond will be a consequence of the decisions that we've made now. We need to, the old people don't we in the future to say, they called it right. We don't want to say, what on earth did they think they were doing? So we're here for the long term. The second is that through our work with students, through our work with the community, through our purchasing, through our procurement, through all the things that we do. We have enormous power to do good, and we have, if we don't use it properly, power to do harm. And we have to work at shifting that balance into the territory where we can do good. We do have a civic responsibility to the region. We are one of the largest employers in the city and beyond. We're one of the largest economic presences. We're one of the largest social and cultural presences. And the bulk of our work, of course, is with students, as with all universities. That's really important. And I do like to say that our work with students is what I call a conversation with the future. You know, we're talking to people who are going to go far beyond where we are. And I can't remember, there's another slide, I think there might be. I did about this last night. Yes, all right. So there are practical constraints, some of which I've said. You know, all read my blog. It's the first thing you do on a Monday morning. Absolutely. I was in Hong Kong 2 weeks ago, working with our students. Our international presence is really important to globally engaged university. So I do some long-haul flying, right? And I know what long-haul flying does to the environment. So I need to think hard about this. It's the only long-haul I've done this year, and it's the only long-haul I will do this year. We do need to try to model the right behaviours. We do need to design practical measures. And in a context in which there are enormous challenges in getting this right, back to my example of this, finding practical measures that make a difference is often the most useful thing that we can do. And we can make the right noises, and I've spent a lot of time this year reading other universities' strategic plans. I can't possibly imagine why I've done that. It's very easy to make the right noises. Making the right noises is warm words. Everybody feels good. Actually, finding practical measures. I'll always think about practical solutions. That means that we need to shape practical policies, which we have done. And we do need, in all that we do, to think about the long term. And what I think you are about, this network, this group, is about helping us to think about the long term, helping us to ensure that we shape the right policies and that we are able to design and implement practical measures.